I took the Paris call because the client paid in cash and didn't ask for an invoice. I brought my lockpicks, a drill, and a headlamp, and my plan was to swap a busted cellar lock and leave before midnight trains got weird. I went alone because the friend who booked me said the building manager hated extra people. I kept wiping limestone dust off my hands because it made my grip slip. The guy met me outside this quiet stone building and acted like I was late even though I wasn't. He didn't introduce himself. He just looked me over like he was checking for hidden cameras, then stared at my tool bag like it offended him. I asked where the lock was because I don't walk into a job blind. He didn't answer the question, just started moving fast like if I didn't keep up I'd lose him. I told him cash is fine, but I'm not getting dragged into illegal shit. He gave me this thin smile that said he'd already decided what I was, and it pissed me off enough that I followed just to prove I wasn't scared. We cut through a lobby with blank mailboxes and a camera dome that looked dead, then down a service stair where the air turned colder and the light got ugly. This cellar door opened into stairs that didn't smell like wine. Cold at my face. The guy guided me down, fast like he'd done 100 times, and the city noise died behind stone. My headlamp made a hard circle on the walls. I saw chalk arrows. I saw old graffiti. Then my light caught it, and my brain tried to deny it for a second, like it was protecting me from what my eyes already knew. A skull stacked into a clean line like decoration, not history. More bones right behind it, arranged, not buried, not scattered. I stopped, and the words came out before I could swallow them. What the fuck is that? He didn't even look. He kept moving. That non-reaction hit harder than the skulls. I snapped at him anyway because anger felt safer than fear. I told him I'm not touching a lock if this is some sick collector's basement. I'm not leaving fingerprints in a place like this. He finally turned his head just enough to throw me a bored look, like I was the one being dramatic, like this was normal down here and I was wasting his time. At the bottom, we hit a junction where 3 cuts split off. A rusted gate leaned against the wall like it had been ripped off something and shoved aside. He pointed down the right-hand cut and muttered, 2 minutes, like it was an order. Then he vanished into the dark. I listened for his boots. The sound didn't fade the way it should. It just stopped, like someone closed the door on the noise. I waited, then moved because standing there made my chest feel too small. The chalk arrows didn't agree with each other. One set pointed right. Another set pointed left. One set looked fresh, bright white, like someone had drawn it today. Another set looked rubbed and redrawn, like someone kept correcting a lie. I walked the right-hand cut because it was what he'd pointed at, and because I wanted this over, but after maybe 20 steps my light caught a low ceiling and a side cut I swear wasn't there when I passed. It wasn't some little niche I missed. It was a real opening, black and clean-edged, like it had been waiting to appear. I turned around hard, tried to backtrack, told myself I'm tired, I'm jumpy, I'm seeing shit. I hit the same junction again. Same bones, same chalk mess, same footprint on the floor that I hadn't noticed before, and that made me feel stupid and angry at the same time. A wet bare footprint, long and flat, no tred, no scoof, like someone stepped there and lifted their foot clean. I looked at my boots and my bag and felt my pulse start to hammer, because I knew I hadn't made that print. I started talking out loud like an idiot, calling for the guy, telling him I'm leaving, calling him a fucking scammer, telling him to show me the lock or I'm done. My voice came back wrong, smaller like the stone chewed it. I picked another corridor and forced myself down it, counting turns under my breath, like counting would pin the place in place. Left, then right, then a shallow bend. I kept my palm on the wall to keep my bearings, and the stone felt slick in spots, like too many hands had slid over the same path. I turned again and saw the same scratch graffiti tag I'd seen near the junction, same little triangle carved under the letters. That was the moment my stomach dropped for real. I wasn't walking in circles by accident. The place was feeding me back to the same spot like a joke. I pulled my phone for the time just to anchor myself. No signal, fine, but the screen didn't even show the clock. It lit for half a second and died to black, like it refused to work down there. My phone had no signal and no time, just a dead screen that reflected my face like an idiot mask. I hit the side button until my thumb hurt. Nothing. For a second, I thought about the drill, about putting a bit into the stone and making enough noise to get attention, but then the thought twisted. Attention from who? I didn't want to announce myself to whatever the fuck this was. I shoved the phone away and tried to breathe through my nose like that would keep me calm. Footsteps came from behind me. Slow, patient, not lost. The pace was wrong for somebody searching. It sounded like somebody who knew exactly where I was and didn't need to hurry. Another light swept the wall beside my head, clipped it like a warning shot. I ducked on instinct. A man stepped into my beam and smiled like he already knew my name. He didn't threaten me with a knife. He didn't need to. He lifted a can of spray paint and drew an X on the wall beside me. Marked. The hiss of the paint was loud in that stone, and the X looked too bright, too fresh, like it was meant to be seen. He capped the can with a neat click and just watched me breathe, like he was waiting for me to understand what the mark meant. I snapped, more angry than brave. I shoved past him hard, shoulder first, and he let me through too easily, like the shove was the point. That chilled me more than if he'd fought me. I ran until my lungs burned, took turns without thinking, and slammed into something that didn't give. Bone. Not one bone. A wall of it. Skulls packed in neat rows, long bones stacked like bricks, tidy like a display. Skulls stared at me like trophies. One had a cigarette jammed between its teeth like a joke somebody told themselves too many times. I gagged, tasted dust, and still forced my legs to move because stopping felt like dying. The footsteps stayed behind me, slow. No chase, just pressure. Like the place knew I'd run myself into a corner eventually. My headlamp jittered in my hand, and the shadows made the rows of faces look like they shifted. I scraped my knuckles on stone and didn't even feel it until warm slickness hit my glove. I tried the first instinct, backtrack, and my brain screamed no because back meant that man and that X and whatever came after the mark. I swung my light up, desperate, and saw an iron ladder bolted into the stone, disappearing into a square hatch above. It looked wrong in a good way, like something functional, something that led somewhere normal. I grabbed it and climbed like my life depended on it, because it did. The rungs were cold and slick. My hand slipped once, and my stomach dropped, and for half a second, I pictured a hand grabbing my ankle from below and yanking me down. Nothing grabbed me, but I didn't relax. I kept climbing, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached, eyes fixed on that square. At the hatch, I shoved. It didn't move. I shoved again, and panic flared hot behind my eyes. I whispered, "Come on," like begging metal would help. I jammed my shoulder under it and drove up with my legs. Metal screamed. The hatch shifted just enough to wedge my fingers in. I tore it wider and dragged myself through like a rat escaping a pipe, then rolled onto a concrete floor under fluorescent lights. It was a basement hallway that looked like every other building's backside. Painted walls, a mop bucket, a dumb recycling sign, the hum of electricity. It smelled like laundry and people. For half a second, I just stood there shaking because the normal light felt fake, like a trap that could shut off any moment. Then I heard nothing behind me. No footsteps, no voice, and that silence pushed me into motion. I sprinted upstairs, burst into the lobby, shoved out the front door, and hit the street noise like a slap. Cars, voices, somebody laughing, a dog barking. I ran to my van, fumbled the keys, dropped them, swore loud enough to get a look from a woman on the sidewalk, then snatched them up and yanked my door open. I froze so hard it felt like someone punched the air out of me. On my driver's seat sat my business card, same one I keep in my wallet. Someone had written a new phone number on it in thick marker, like a leash. Under was a small paper bag. Inside, 2 human finger bones, clean and dry, clicking together when I moved. I said yes to the tunnel invite because I wanted to look fearless in front of people who treated danger like a hobby. I packed a basic trauma kit, 2 flashlights, and a bottle of water, and My plan was to stay with the group and turn back the second anything fell off. I went as the only medical guy because someone heard I was in training and decided that counted. I forgot to eat dinner and told myself adrenaline would cover it. They met me on the sidewalk like we were going to show, not going under a city. They kept poking at me with jokes about how I'd save them, how I was the responsible one. I smiled because I didn't want to be the wet blanket, but my stomach already felt hollow and mean. The entrance was a hole in a basement wall behind a laundry room. Detergent smell on the outside, then stone and dust. We went in single file, headlamps bobbing, packs scraping, painted arrows and names layered everywhere like people trying to claim the dark. Everything looked the same after 10 minutes. They moved fast, slapping the walls, stepping over gaps without looking, acting like the place owed them space. I kept counting heads, 7, still 7. My light felt too small, like it had a short leash. We took a couple turns, then hit a longer straight stretch where the ceiling dropped and the air got heavier. The lead guy kept pushing because that was his whole personality, being first. He didn't slow when the tunnel narrowed into a crawlway. He shoved himself in, shoulders twisting, backpack grinding the rock, and he got halfway through and stopped. Not a pause. A hard stop like the tunnel grabbed him by the ribs and said no. At first he laughed, cursed, tried to wriggle backward. Then his voice thinned and his legs started kicking with a different rhythm, fast and messy. His breathing changed into tiny broken pulls that didn't fill him. People behind him pushed because they couldn't see and because panic makes idiots believe pressure fixes pressure. That shove made him jerk forward a fraction, and that fraction made the rock bite deeper. I dropped flat and grabbed his ankles. I pulled. My boots slid on chalky grime and my knees banged the floor. He jerked and the scraping turned ugly, fabric tearing, skin dragging. He screamed once, a full body sound that hit the tunnel and came back at us doubled. Then he went into quieter noises, the kind that come out when a body starts conserving. My headlamp caught his neck straining and his face darkening in the slice of light I could get. His shoulders were wedged. His arms were pinned out in front of him somewhere, useless. Someone wedged in behind me and pinned my hips, trying to help. I snapped at him to back the fuck up, and he didn't move. Hands kept reaching past me, grabbing belt loops and pant legs, yanking like we were hauling a stuck couch. Each tug twisted the trapped guy tighter. I told him to stop pushing. Nobody stopped. I felt his ankles twitch in my grip, and I realized he wasn't controlling those kicks anymore. Someone shouted to cut the pack. I sliced the straps and peeled the backpack off him, buckles snapping loud in the tight space. For half a second, his chest expanded a little, and I got hope. Then his shoulders caught again on a rock shelf inside the passage. He tried to inhale and couldn't. He gagged, then vomited and choked because he couldn't lift his head or turn. The smell hit hard and made people cough, and that coughing made him panic more because he could hear us breathing and he couldn't do it right. I tried to reach forward with 2 fingers to clear his mouth, but the angle crushed my wrist against rock and I couldn't get far without scraping him. They started arguing over me like I was furniture. One wanted to keep yanking. One wanted to pull his arms from the front. Another started digging at the stone with a pocket knife, like limestone would respect determination. I slapped that hand away and got called a pussy. I told them if they kept grabbing him like that, they'd kill him faster. Somebody laughed and said I was making it worse by panicking everybody. Another said he was almost free, like repeating it would make it true. The gaps between his tiny breaths stretched out, and every gap made the whole group go louder. I forced my voice low and told them to give me room. Nobody moved. One guy tried to crawl over my legs, and I drove my fist into his chest just to make him back up. He hit the wall and called me a bitch. Fine. I saw his legs twitch, then go slack, then twitch again. I smelled urine and my stomach flipped because that meant his body was letting go. My kit had gauze and tape. None of that opens rock. I made the call I hate admitting. I told them we stop pulling, we stop ripping him, we conserve our air, and we go get help. They stared at me like I'd suggested murder. One hissed that cops would ruin their lives. Another said the entrance would get sealed and their whole scene would die. I told them, ugly and clear, that their hobbies weren't worth a human lung. They argued harder and kept touching him anyway. And the trap guy made this thin, wet wheeze that sounded less like breathing and more like trying. That noise snapped something in me. I picked two who looked the least stupid, and I dragged them away by their straps and shoulders. Leaving felt like betrayal, even though staying was useless. We sprinted through tunnels that all looked identical. The guy in front swore he knew the route, then hesitated at every split, light jittering left-right like he was praying for graffiti to save him. I shoved him forward. The other kept swearing at me, saying I made it worse, saying we should have kept pulling. I told him to shut the fuck up and keep moving. My legs went rubber. My mouth went dry. We hit stairs, then a ladder that rang under our weight. We found a street grate and forced it up with shaking hands. We popped up into Paris night air like rats. The street was normal in a way that felt obscene. Cars, laughter, music from a bar, a couple kissing like there wasn't a man choking on rock 20 meters down. I called emergency services and talked too fast, tripping over words, trying to give a location I didn't have. One of the two kept telling me to hang up, saying I'd ruin everyone. I told him to get away from me or I'd scream on the sidewalk until someone dragged us all in. He went quiet. On the curb, my wrist throbbed where the rock had pinned it, and my shoulder screamed every time I moved it. I kept replaying the last breath I'd heard down there and wondering if it was still going, like a metronome I'd abandoned. Dispatch kept asking for landmarks, and I kept saying the same stupid things. Basement, laundry machines, a painted arrow, a low arch. One cop showed up first and looked at my boots like I'd crawled out of the sewer. He asked what we were doing down there, and I lied once out of reflex, then I stopped and told the truth because lying didn't help anyone breathe. While they geared up, one of the two with me tried to grab my phone, and I slapped his hand away, so hard it stung. He called me a snitch under his breath. I told him if he said that word again, I'd break his nose right there. He backed off, eyes darting, already calculating how to disappear. When the first team went in, they asked me to point, to describe, to walk them through what I remembered. I did, and every sentence felt like dragging gravel through my throat. I waited outside for a long time, listening for something I couldn't hear, watching people pass like it was any other night. When the team came back up, their faces told me enough before anyone said anything. They had questions, paperwork, the calm professional tone that doesn't change even when someone dies. They asked for names. I didn't have them. I had nicknames and faces and dumb jokes. That night, the only thing the group coordinated perfectly was disappearing. They blocked me, denied, posted normal photos the next day like they'd been at home. I couldn't stop seeing hands on his legs, everyone pulling at once like we were competing to tear him apart. When the authorities finally understood enough to respond, the rest of the group scattered. Phones went silent. Messages came in later telling me to delete everything, telling me I was a traitor, telling me I was a bitch for not protecting them. Nobody wanted to admit where the hole was. Nobody wanted to lead anyone back. I sat on a curb, hands black with dust, and kept feeling his ankles in my grip like my fingers were still locked there. I went home and scrubbed limestone dust out of my nails until they bled. I threw my clothes away. Every time I tried to sleep, my chest tightened, and I'd wake up holding my breath, then forcing air in through my teeth because I couldn't stand the silence between breaths. Weeks later, I saw a small news blurb about a body recovered in illegal galleries. No name, no details, just a line that made my stomach drop because the tunnels are only 20 meters under the city and still deep enough to hide what you don't want to face. I got permission to record in the official ossuary because a documentary editor wanted real Catacombs sound, not stock audio. I brought a small recorder, fresh batteries, and a clipped-on headlamp, and my plan was to follow the route, capture 10 minutes of room tone, then meet my handler at the exit stairs. I went alone with gear because the production was cheap and rushed. I kept tapping the recorder like a superstition because it sometimes froze in cold rooms. Down there, the bones made the air feel thick. The walls weren't decor. They were stacked people. Skulls packed tight, eye sockets like punched-out holes. Inscriptions told me to remember death while I stood inside it. My handler pointed me to a corner and walked off, probably bored. I didn't like that. I called after him and told him to stay where I could see him. He kept walking. I followed, anger pushing me more than fear. I told him I had official permission, that I wasn't wandering, that I just needed 10 minutes and I wasn't getting left down there alone. He finally turned, annoyed, and said the route was safe and I was being dramatic. I said, "Safe doesn't mean empty," and he snapped back that he wasn't my babysitter. The whole thing felt petty and stupid. Two grown men arguing in a hallway made of dead people. But it stuck in my throat because I knew he could just vanish around a corner and leave me with nothing but arrows and stone. So I went back to the corner, set my bag down, checked my levels, and hit record. I stood still because if I paced, I'd ruin the take. That's when the silence showed its teeth. The catacombs don't stay quiet. They chew sound and spit it back raw. Little noises came from far away and then landed close. A tiny drip would pop somewhere and the echo would arrive like it moved. My breathing bounced around and returned a beat late, like another person exhaling in sync with me, but slightly off, like they were trying to match me and couldn't decide if they wanted to. My headlamp flickered once. I didn't panic. I swapped batteries anyway because I'm not dumb. The click of the battery door sounded too loud. My fingers felt thick and clumsy. When I clicked it back on, the beam caught a fresh, wet handprint on a skull, shiny like someone had just touched it. Not dust smudged, not old grime. Vet, 5-finger streaks and a palm, right across bone that should have been dry, that didn't belong in a sealed tourist route. I stared at it, trying to force it into a normal category. Staff, cleaning, condensation, a tourist who broke off and thought it was funny. But the print looked like it had weight behind it, like someone braced there, leaned in, pressed hard, then pulled away. I swung the light down the corridor and listened. Nothing moved. No gulf, no Schaffe, no distant group. Just the same cold air and that packed wall of faces pretending to be architecture. I stopped the recording, pocketed the device, and started walking toward the exit signs. My boots clicked on the stone. The click echoed behind me, then echoed again a half beat later, like a second pair trying to match my pace. I sped up. The second echo sped up. I stopped. The second echo stopped late. One extra step, like someone didn't have brakes. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just wrong, and that's what made my stomach drop. I told myself it was acoustics. I said it in my head like a prayer. I kept moving. The bones watched. The air stayed cold and close, like it wanted to stick to my skin. I tried my phone out of habit, got no signal, and the blank bars made me feel stupid. I called the handler's name again, louder this time. My voice ran down the tunnel and came back thin, like it had been scraped against stone on the way. I walked faster. The half-beat steps stayed with me, always behind, always almost syncing up, like whoever it was didn't want to give me the satisfaction of matching perfectly. I kept turning my head, flashing the light behind me in quick jerks, and every time I saw nothing, I felt worse. Nothing means you can't measure distance. Nothing means you can't plan. Then my recorder in my pocket started playing back audio on its own, thin, muffled, my own voice saying my name the way I say it when I'm tired. Not introducing myself, not joking, just my name, low and flat, like someone checking a tag on luggage. I yanked it out, and the screen showed a file I hadn't made, a new track, time-stamped minutes in the future. Not later tonight. Minutes. Like the device had jumped ahead and recorded something that hadn't happened yet. I hit stop. It kept playing. I hit power. The screen stayed bright. The audio kept going, my name repeating, but not exactly the same each time, like the voice was learning how to shape it, getting closer to how I really sound. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I ripped open the battery door and tore the batteries out with shaking fingers. The sound cut mid-syllable. The screen died. In the sudden quiet, I heard my own breathing go ragged, and I hated how loud I was in that place. I held the batteries in my palm like they were proof. My hands wouldn't steady. I shoved them into my pocket and started moving again because standing there felt like inviting something to close the gap. I kept my headlamp aimed low so I wouldn't blind myself off the pale bone. The half-beat steps followed, sometimes lagging, sometimes creeping closer, like the gap behind me changed when I wasn't counting. At one point, I heard a soft scrape against stone, like a hand sliding along the wall to keep balance. That's when my anger came back, sharp and stupid. I whispered, "Fuck you," at the dark like that would do anything. My own whisper came back warped, stretched, and for a second it sounded like someone else said it right into my ear. I felt my skin prickle under my shirt. I hit a sign I recognized, arrow toward the exit stairs, and relief hit so hard it made me dizzy. I followed it, turned, saw the stairwell gate, and my legs almost gave out. I climbed anyway. Each step thudded, and the echo chased me. Halfway up, I heard the extra step again, not on the stairs, but down below, like it had reached the bottom and stopped, waiting. At the top, warm air and distant street noise washed over me. I pushed through the exit like I was breaking the surface. My whole body was buzzing. The handler was up there leaning on the rail, scrolling his phone, looking bored. I walked right up to him and let it out. I told him there was someone down there, that the route wasn't empty, that my recorder turned on by itself, that his safe route could kiss my ass. He smirked like I was trying to sell him a ghost story. That smirk made me see red. I told him if he didn't walk me out properly and file something, I'd call whoever signed my permit, and I'd say he abandoned me in the route. He got stiff at that because lazy people fear paperwork more than they fear bones. He muttered something about tourists and echoes and started walking me out like he was doing me a favor. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look worried. He just wanted me gone. Outside, daylight hit me like a slap. I sat on a bench and realized I was sweating through my shirt. My hands shook so hard I could barely work the buttons. I forced myself to listen to the original file because I needed to prove I wasn't losing it. I needed something normal to grab onto. The room tone was normal for the first minute. Drips, distant group noise, my breathing. Then, under everything, a whisper slid in, too close to the mic for a space that big. It didn't say boo. It didn't do movie shit. It calmly listed the street name of my hotel and the exact room number I'd checked into that afternoon. I replayed it because denial is stubborn. Same whisper, same details, clean and correct. My stomach dropped so hard I thought I'd throw up. I looked up at the street around me like the buildings might be listening. The handler asked what I was doing and I ignored him. I deleted the file. I formatted the card. I formatted it again. I checked the storage like a lunatic. Empty. Still, my head kept replaying the whisper like it had carved itself into me. I tried to talk myself into a normal explanation. Maybe my hotel info was on paperwork. Maybe the editor shared it. Maybe the handler was a petty asshole with friends. None of it explained the future timestamp. None of it explained my name coming out of the recorder when the batteries were still in my pocket. None of it explained that wet handprint on bone that should have been cold and dry and dead. I went back to my room. I kept scanning faces on the train and the sidewalk like I'd recognize the sound of those extra footsteps if it grew legs. The front desk guy smiled and asked how my day was. I nodded and kept walking because if I opened my mouth, I'd start shouting and never stop. On my floor, the hallway felt too long. The carpet swallowed my steps, and that almost felt worse because now I couldn't hear my own pace clearly. I kept glancing back like an idiot. Nothing there, just doors and quiet and stale air. I reached my door, swiped the card, and pushed. My door chain was latched from the inside when I arrived.